At my cousin's wedding, I was told, "There's no seat for you." I smiled, walked over to the gift table, and handed them my $8,000 contribution. 10 minutes later, they were chasing me through the parking lot. I, 32M, had been planning for my cousin's wedding for months. When the invitation arrived with my name elegantly printed on expensive cardstock, I immediately set aside $8,000 for their gift. This wasn't just any cousin. We grew up together, practically brothers, and I wanted to make their special day unforgettable. The morning of the wedding, I drove 3 hours to the venue, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and crystal chandeliers. I wore my best suit and carried the envelope containing a cashier's check that represented 2 months of overtime work. My excitement was genuine. I couldn't wait to see the look on their faces when they opened it later. The ceremony was beautiful. I stood in the back with other family members, watching my cousin exchange vows with his longtime girlfriend. During the processional, I caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. He smiled back, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Then came the reception. I approached the entrance to the banquet hall where a wedding coordinator stood with a clipboard and seating chart. She asked for my name, and I told her. She scanned the list once, then twice, her finger moving down each page with increasing urgency. She looked up at me with an apologetic expression and explained that there wasn't a seat assigned for me. I assumed it was a simple oversight. Weddings are chaotic, and mistakes happen. I suggested she check with my cousin or his new wife to sort it out. That's when things got interesting. My cousin's new mother-in-law appeared beside the coordinator like a hawk swooping on prey. She looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain and informed me that the seating had been very carefully planned. There simply wasn't room for me at any table. I felt my stomach drop. I asked if this was some kind of mistake, reminding her that I was family. She responded that the bride's side needed more seats, and some adjustments had been made. I wasn't part of the immediate family, so I didn't make the cut. The coordinator looked mortified, caught between a family dispute she clearly wanted no part of. I asked to speak with my cousin directly, but the mother-in-law blocked that suggestion immediately. She told me he was busy with wedding duties and couldn't be bothered with seating issues. I stood there for a moment, processing what was happening. 3 hours of driving, months of anticipation, and an $8,000 gift, only to be turned away at the door like an unwanted solicitor. Other guests were walking past us, some recognizing me and looking confused about why I wasn't going inside. Then I smiled. I told the mother-in-law that I completely understood. Space was limited, and these things happened. I was just glad I could be there for the ceremony itself. She seemed surprised by my gracious response, probably expecting an argument or scene. I excused myself and walked calmly to the gift table, which was positioned in the lobby area outside the banquet hall. It was already overflowing with wrapped presents and envelopes. I found the envelope I had placed there before the ceremony, a crisp white envelope with their names written in my careful handwriting. I picked it up. The coordinator was still dealing with other guests, but I caught her attention and explained that since I wouldn't be staying for dinner, I wanted to personally deliver my gift to the couple. She nodded absently, probably relieved to have one less problem to deal with. I walked back toward the banquet hall entrance where the mother-in-law was now greeting other arriving guests. I approached her with the same pleasant smile and told her I was heading out, but wanted to make sure the happy couple received their gift from me personally. I handed her the envelope. She accepted it with a patronizing smile and assured me they would get it. I thanked her, congratulated her on the beautiful wedding, and headed toward the parking lot. I could hear the sounds of celebration beginning inside, clinking glasses, laughter, and the beginning strains of dinner music. I was halfway to my car when I heard shouting behind me. I turned to see my cousin running across the parking lot in his tuxedo, still wearing his boutonniere. His face was flushed, and he was calling my name frantically. Behind him, moving as fast as her heels would allow, came his new bride with her dress hiked up to avoid tripping. The mother-in-law was close behind, looking absolutely panicked. My cousin reached me first, completely out of breath. He asked where I was going, why I was leaving. I explained calmly that there hadn't been a seat for me at the reception, so I decided to head home rather than cause any awkwardness. The bride arrived just as I finished speaking, and I could see the confusion and horror dawning on her face. She turned to her mother and demanded to know what had happened. The mother-in-law started stammering about space limitations and difficult decisions. My cousin looked back and forth between us, clearly putting pieces together. He asked me directly if his new mother-in-law had told me there was no seat for me. I confirmed that she had, adding that I understood these things happened and didn't want to make their special day about my feelings. That's when the bride exploded. She turned on her mother with a fury I hadn't expected, demanding to know how she could have done such a thing. The mother-in-law tried to defend herself, claiming she was just trying to accommodate everyone and had to make tough choices. My cousin asked me to wait, that they would fix this immediately. He was practically pleading, and I could see genuine distress in his eyes. I told him not to worry about it. The ceremony had been beautiful, and that was what mattered most. The bride was still arguing with her mother when my cousin noticed the envelope in the mother-in-law's hand. He asked what that was, and she handed it over, explaining that I had asked her to deliver it personally. My cousin opened it right there in the parking lot. I watched his face change as he saw the cashier's check. His eyes widened, and he showed it to his wife. She covered her mouth with her hands, staring at the amount. $8,000 was more than they had received from any other single guest, more than some entire families had given combined. The mother-in-law peered over their shoulders and went completely pale when she saw the check. She started apologizing immediately, claiming she had made a terrible mistake, that there had been a misunderstanding. My cousin looked at me with something approaching awe. He asked why I had given them so much, and I explained that family was important to me. I had worked extra shifts for months to make sure I could give them something meaningful for their new life together. The bride started crying, but not happy tears. She was devastated, realizing that her mother had essentially kicked out the most generous guest at their wedding. She apologized profusely, begging me to come back inside, promising they would make room somehow. I could see other wedding guests starting to notice the commotion in the parking lot. Some were walking over to see what was happening, and I knew this was quickly becoming the kind of scene that would overshadow their entire reception. I told them I appreciated the gesture, but I didn't want to cause any more disruption to their special day. The damage was done, and trying to fix it now would only create more awkwardness for everyone involved. My cousin wasn't accepting that answer. He insisted they would find a way to make this right, that I was family and belonged there. The bride was nodding vigorously, still glaring at her mother. But I had made my decision. I handed the check back to my cousin and told him I wanted them to have it regardless of what had happened. Their marriage was what mattered, not the politics of wedding seating. I wished them both happiness and started walking toward my car again. The mother-in-law suddenly found her voice and started chasing after me, literally grabbing my arm and begging me to reconsider. She was offering to give up her own seat, to eat in the kitchen, anything to make this right. The desperation in her voice was almost pitiful. I gently removed her hand from my arm and explained that this wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about the principle. She had made a choice based on what she thought was important, and now she had to live with the consequences. My cousin caught up to us again and asked me to think about this. He pointed out that his new wife shouldn't have to suffer for her mother's mistake, that their whole wedding was being ruined over a seating chart error. I looked at both of them, him in his expensive tuxedo, her in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and felt a wave of sadness. This should have been the happiest day of their lives, and instead they were standing in a parking lot dealing with family drama. But I also felt something else, a clarity I hadn't expected. I told my cousin that I loved him and wanted nothing but happiness for his marriage. However, the way this situation had been handled showed me where I stood in the family hierarchy, and that was information I needed to have. The bride interrupted, swearing that her mother didn't speak for her, that she had no idea this had happened. I believed her. The shock on her face had been genuine. But I also pointed out that her mother felt comfortable making this decision without consulting anyone, which suggested this wasn't entirely out of character. More wedding guests were gathering now, and I could see the coordinator frantically trying to manage the situation. The longer this went on, the more it would impact their reception. Everyone inside was probably wondering where the bride and groom had disappeared to. I made the decision for them. I told my cousin to go back inside and enjoy his wedding. I promised I wasn't angry, just disappointed, and that we could talk more after they got back from their honeymoon. I hugged them both and headed to my car again. This time, nobody followed me. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror still standing in the parking lot. The bride gesticulating wildly at her mother, my cousin running his hands through his hair, and various guests looking confused and concerned. The 3-hour drive home gave me plenty of time to think. Update 1. 3 days later, my phone started ringing. My cousin called first, apologizing again and asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious to hear his perspective now that the wedding chaos had settled. We met at a diner halfway between our cities. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept since the wedding. He immediately launched into explanations and apologies, but I stopped him and asked him to just tell me what had really happened. The truth was more complicated than I had realized. Apparently, the bride's family had been making demands about the guest list for months. They had a large extended family and felt that the groom's side was getting too many seats relative to their contribution to the wedding costs. The bride's parents were paying for most of the reception, and they felt this gave them veto power over the final guest list. My cousin had fought to keep me on the list, but when push came to shove, he had been forced to choose between me and keeping peace with his new in-laws. He chose peace. The mother-in-law had volunteered to be the one to handle difficult conversations with guests who didn't make the final cut. She was supposed to call people in advance, explain the situation diplomatically, and offer to celebrate with them separately. She had never called me. Instead, she decided to handle it at the door, apparently thinking it would be easier to just turn me away than to have an awkward phone conversation weeks earlier. She hadn't anticipated that I would have such a substantial gift, or that the scene would unfold so publicly. My cousin swore he had no idea she planned to do it that way. If he had known, he would have insisted on calling me himself to explain the situation properly. I listened to all of this without interrupting, processing the layers of family politics that had led to that moment in the parking lot. When he finished explaining, he asked what he could do to fix things between us. I told him the truth. I wasn't angry about not being invited to the reception. Wedding planning was stressful, and difficult decisions had to be made. I was hurt that nobody had respected me enough to have an honest conversation about it beforehand. If someone had called me weeks earlier and explained that space was limited and they had to prioritize the bride's family, I would have been disappointed but understanding. I might have still given them a generous gift and wished them well. But being blindsided at the door, being treated like an uninvited crasher, that had been humiliating and unnecessary. My cousin nodded throughout this conversation, and I could see he genuinely understood why I had been upset. He asked if there was any way to repair our relationship, because losing me over this was killing him. I suggested we take some time to let emotions settle, then gradually rebuild our connection. Family relationships were too important to throw away over one bad day, but trust needed to be earned back slowly. He agreed, and we shook hands before parting ways. Update 2. 2 weeks later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a professional photo album containing pictures from the wedding ceremony and reception. A handwritten note from the bride explained that she wanted me to have memories of the parts of the day that had been beautiful before everything went wrong. She also included a longer letter detailing the aftermath of the parking lot confrontation. Apparently, the argument between her and her mother had continued long into the reception. Other family members had gotten involved, taking sides, and creating exactly the kind of drama that weddings are supposed to avoid. The evening had never recovered its celebratory atmosphere. The bride wrote that she felt terrible about how I had been treated, and that she had learned some uncomfortable truths about her mother's attitude toward my cousin's family. She was working on setting better boundaries, but it was a difficult process. She also mentioned that they had decided not to cash my check until they could find an appropriate way to thank me properly. They were planning to use part of it for a donation to a charity I supported, and the rest for something meaningful that would remind them of my generosity rather than the circumstances under which it was given. I was touched by the gesture and wrote back thanking her for reaching out. I told her I hoped they were settling into married life well, and that the wedding drama hadn't cast a shadow over their honeymoon. Update 3. A month after the wedding, the mother-in-law called me directly. This was unexpected. I had assumed she would avoid me indefinitely rather than acknowledge what had happened. Instead, she asked if she could take me to lunch to apologize properly. I was curious enough to agree. We met at an upscale restaurant, and she immediately launched into the most thorough apology I had ever received. She acknowledged that her behavior had been inexcusable, that she had let wedding stress and family politics cloud her judgment, and that she had caused unnecessary pain for everyone involved. What surprised me was her honesty about her motivations. She admitted that she had been feeling defensive about her daughter marrying into a family she didn't know well. She had wanted to assert some control over the wedding to prove that her side of the family mattered. When space became an issue, She had made decisions based on who she thought was essential versus optional, and she had wrongly categorized me as optional. She hadn't realized how close I was to my cousin or how significant my gift would be. She had made assumptions based on limited information and had acted on those assumptions without consulting anyone. The consequences had been immediate and severe. Not only had she humiliated me and created a scene at her daughter's wedding, but she had also damaged her relationship with her new son-in-law and caused ongoing tension in the new marriage. She asked what she could do to make amends. I told her that her apology was appreciated and seemed genuine. The damage to her relationship with her daughter and son-in-law was theirs to work out, not mine. As for our relationship, I suggested we could start fresh if she was willing to treat me with basic respect going forward. She agreed immediately and seemed relieved that I wasn't holding a permanent grudge. 6 months later, my cousin and I have rebuilt our friendship. His wife and I have developed a cordial relationship, and even her mother and I can be in the same room without awkwardness. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about family dynamics, the importance of clear communication, and the power of choosing grace over revenge when given the opportunity. Sometimes the most satisfying response to being wronged isn't elaborate payback. It's simply maintaining your dignity and letting the other person's actions speak for themselves. The $8,000, by the way, went toward the down payment on their first house. They sent me a photo of them holding the keys, with a note thanking me for helping make their dream of homeownership possible. That photo is now framed on my desk, a reminder that generosity given freely, even in difficult circumstances, tends to find its way back to you in unexpected ways.